Right, without any further ado, welcome to this panel on collaboration in Megagames, in Megagame design in particular. It's my pleasure to have with me Tim Campbell, designer of the Megagame Shot Heard Around the Universe, and also a significant assistant designer in several of the Megagames his wife Becky has designed, including Everybody Dies, which is the one I think most people have heard of. Tim, welcome.
To be here.
We've also got Zane. Zane has been designing Megagames for a little while now. He's the co-founder of Diversionary Games, a group that ran Megagames in Southampton for a few years now. People will almost certainly have heard of Aftermath, which was designed as part of a team. He's now one quarter of Very Large Huge Games, who run, even by Megagame standards, very large games in London, and they've so far run First Contact 2035. Look out for more games from them this year and hopefully in the future. Zane, welcome.
Thank you.
And finally, Paddy. Paddy is the secretary of Pennine Megagames. He's designed the pre-Cyberpunk game Running Hot, which has run both online and is soon going to be running in person. And he's the co-designer of the magical hospital chaos simulator Phase Anatomy. Paddy, welcome.
Hello, glad to be here.
So obviously you've been selected for this panel or invited to this panel partly because all of you have designed and run Megagames as part of a team. So do you want to just tell me a little bit about your experiences of doing that, when you've done it, and how? Oh, I beg your pardon. I'm reminded by Chris in the chat that although MegaCon is running for free this year, we do have a Ko-fi that you can donate to support the costs of putting it on. So the link to that is in the chat. And please have a look at it. Diving into the panel, tell me a bit about your experiences of developing and running a Megagame as part of a team.
Well, I'll go first. Mine is perhaps slightly atypical in that Becky, as my wife, is essentially my co-designer on all the designs that both of us do. And it's technically not co-designer because we've agreed between us that we don't list the other as a designer, but practically we do all of the designs together. It's always the brainchild of the person that's on the front of the handbook. But yeah, there's significant involvement from both of us throughout the process.
So just diving very briefly into that, what's behind the decision not to sort of co-credit each other as designers?
I can't recall whether we did it for Shot first or and then just continued from there, or whether we sort of consciously introduced it on a later game. But I guess the point, we didn't want to take the spotlight away from the person who had initiated it and done the majority of the work still in driving it through. For Trope High, I did have significant involvement in it, but it's Becky's creation. It wouldn't exist if she hadn't started it off and given it the push to get it through and done most of the work on it. And so we know what we did for each other on it, and we don't really feel the need to get the spotlight on it from anyone else. And the same with Shot. Becky was invaluable on that and put in loads of it, but it's my beast and it wouldn't exist had I not pushed it through.
Oh, entirely fair. So moving on, Zane, you've been in several collaborative Megagame design projects.
Yeah, for me, I work best in teams. If I'm left to my own devices, I'll never finish anything. I have 1,000,001 designs and ideas for everything popping around my head, and I need other people to help sort of focus that a little bit. I deliver for other people. If I've got other people reliant on me, I'm much more likely to do or finish something. So I have to work in a group. If I was entirely on my own, I'd have never finished a game, I don't think. So I pulled together originally a bunch of my friends, mostly my little role play group locally, and we did Watch the Skies first as a group, and we sort of rewrote that, and that then gave us the sort of the working relationship to then go on and do the other games, which there were lead designers on them, but we'll go into that, I guess, in the other questions. So to me, it's really important for me, and I think others, to actually work in a group. I think we all probably do work more in a team than we think we do. We rely on other people, and I'm not sure anyone truly design something entirely on their own, and I just think we probably help people formalize that and help people support people in that. I think would be good. So.
Very sensible. Lots to dig into there, but before we do, I'll ask Paddy as well for his experience on working as part of a team to design Megagames and how that's been for you, Paddy.
So Running Hot, which is my first game, was just me on my own, which was done to like a really tight deadline because I made myself. But then Phase Anatomy, which is a game that I designed with John Geetworth and Holly Wall, came out of Mega Jam that we did 2 years ago now, I think it is. Time's a illusion.
Yeah.
And that was designed a Mega Game in 48 hours. And then when we got to the end of it, I thought, actually, there's a game here like this. What we've come up with is definitely something. It's the thing that we've written in this past 48 hours is broken, but like I think there's enough here for us to go on. And then me, John, and Holly kept on with it before Holly ended up was too busy to continue it. So me and John basically were bouncing ideas off each other and building it. And I think that probably made a better game than if either of us had just done it on our own. I think it's definitely a game that comes out of both of our styles of both like writing and design.
Brilliant. Okay, so Zane talked a lot about needing to be in a team to sort of get work done, but also working better in a team. And I think, Paddy, you sort of mentioned the same. I'm curious, for you, is there sort of a range of complementary skills, or is it just more about having people in the same room and the energy that creates?
I think
for Phase, it was a case of I think we were both kind of I think we could have like designed, we both have designed games on our own, but the value of having someone else who's also developed a game was when you hit your brick wall, they don't, and then they can keep going, and then that gives you the inspiration you need to break through your problem, and like that sort of thing. So yeah, there's the whole bouncing ideas across, which is helpful, but it was also knowing that if I get stuck, the project isn't stuck. There's still someone who's able to keep on moving forward, and like it's not just a complete and utter like motivational like drain because you go, oh, I've just hit this other problem, I'll go into this other thing, oh, now I've hit another problem. Like, you've got someone else to sort it.
Yeah. So Zane, you were about to jump in there, I think.
Yeah, I can't remember what I was going to say, but I'm sure I'll say something different. I think that sort of working, as Paddy was saying, having someone to bounce ideas off is absolutely key. And I think we probably all do that, even if you're not working in a team, because you can't help talking about ideas, especially designers. But to me, it's more than just that. As Paddy said, it helps you keep moving forward, but it is about complementing each other's skills. Everyone realizing that they have different skills. If we just left it to, I think there are probably a lot of really good designs out there still sort of half on bits of paper because people haven't got those other skills to take those ideas to the next step, because they've got a brilliant idea, they might have some brilliant mechanics, but they're missing some of those other needs. I mean, for me personally, I'm very dyslexic, so having people that can check my work and stuff like that is incredibly important. And anyone who's played any of my early games will notice quite a lot of that still slips through, and even the best editors miss some of it. But yeah, so I think there's a lot of value in just having people to bounce ideas on, but it's more than just that.
Yeah,
I'd echo that for sure. I think for me, definitely a lot of those rubber duck conversations where just you almost don't need the person to reply, but talking through the problem that you're trying to solve will quite often lead you to yes, that's obviously the answer. But in terms of specific skills for me personally, probably the big one is all of the graphic design. I am, you know, my teachers at school were very rude about me in art with some justification. And so, yeah, I usually mention it in post-game wrap-ups, but were I to be doing the game single-handedly, it'd be a lot more drawing in crayon rather than the good-looking cards and counters, which are entirely Becky's creation.
Okay. Delving a bit more into that sort of skill set, we've talked about graphic design, which is absolutely key for a mega game, and writing, which is another vital skill. What other skills are vital to get when you're putting together a team for a mega game? What do you want to make sure someone in the team can do?
I think there's a few different approaches to sort of this, and this probably goes back to anyone that's done any sort of leadership courses or anything like that, is actually a step back of actually how do you want to structure that team. And mega game design, I don't think is any different than any team in any other creative aspect of the world. I do a lot I'm in project management and leadership, and you know, you need someone that's driving it. There needs to be a vision behind the design. You need someone who's willing to look at the detail and take the time to make sure the detail's right, because quite often that person that has the vision doesn't always have the detail. You know, you need someone who can sell the idea and market it, because they're not the same skills. And then, as you said, that's slightly different than you need someone to write and you need someone to graphics. These are sort of more personality types, I think, rather than skill sets. You also need the skill sets, but you need the right sort of personality types to help make sure that group stays together.
Yeah, 100%. So someone who's quite disciplined and driving, someone who's quite detail oriented and careful, someone who's quite I hesitate to say extroverted, because being good at advertising and selling and public relations is so much more than just being extroverted, but
yeah,
someone who's good at presenting the thing.
Yeah, it's being comfortable in different sort of environments, and yeah, you're right. It's not just extrovert, but yeah. Sorry, Tim.
I think Zane sort of touched on an interesting point with the project management point, and I think that's part of the reasoning as to why me and Becky we've always only ever had one designer on it. And I'd be interested to hear the feedback from some of the guys that have designed in larger groups. But for us, there's a very clear decision maker, and it is the designer, and it's their game. And you know, if I'm commenting on one of Becky's designs, I'll look at it and I'll challenge and I'll say, I don't think this works, I think we should do this instead. But ultimately, if Becky says we're going to do this, that is what we're going to do, because it's her vision and her game. I wonder how you guys find it in sort of the larger groups like that.
Happy to jump in. So in the first ones with Diversionary Games, there was a clear lead. Like each one of the games, there was one of us that was leading that. So similar to you guys, Aftermath and Infinite Horizons were my babies, and Doomsday was Barry's baby. So there was always a lead decision maker that was always challenged, but at the end of the day, if they went, no, I want this, that was the decision. With First Contact, it was slightly different, because we sort of became a team more organically. It sort of accidentally formed together and then became more formalized, but actually we've never had that chance to sit down, and I'm going to talk about this a bit later, but there is a need to sit down and formalize roles early on. If you are going to do it seriously as a team, you need to do that. And we've had to make decisions on a more sort of vote-based ones when there isn't a clear lead on that aspect of the game. There's a lead on different aspects, but for some that are more general, it is a bit more of a discussion and a vote, which I'm not so keen on. I think it's better to have a lead.
I was going to say, Zane, there's 4 of you in the team as well, so deciding things by vote. I mean, from a mega game design perspective, if you get a group of 4 and tell them to decide things by vote, you're deliberately setting them up for conflict.
Oh yeah, and you've got to have some conflict in a team. But it generally works. There's usually a point at which someone will back down, and yeah, and the decisions are very rarely that important that it's going
Yeah.
to cause that big a rift that you can't move on. So we're only designing mega games, so I think it usually ends up with compromise on one thing and being less compromising on another, a negotiation rather than a vote. But
yeah, well, that's the thing, isn't it? Like sometimes a vote is necessary, but wherever possible, you want genuine consensus, even if it's not.
Yeah, and with
showing
First
up.
Contact, we did have sort of areas that were sort of more led by each one of us, so it was easier in those areas. There was a bit more of a lead, whereas there were obviously some areas that it wasn't really. We hadn't decided who the lead was, or they grew out of the game as we were designing it. But.
Oh, fair enough. Paddy, my understanding is that for Phase Anatomy, there was no real appointment of a lead at any point. It just sort of everything remained organic. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's very anarchist like that, which is probably what happened.
Well, I mean, you are
John was
both
involved.
quite
Yeah.
anarchic characters, but yeah. How did that work in practice? How did you handle decision making in that setting?
I think me and John both trusted each other quite a lot is the main thing. And like the way Phase is built is that there are like 6 sections of the game that happen, and that means that you can actually just say, actually, you just take these sections of the game, you take these sections of the game, and then you've kind of got a place where as Zane was saying, that you've got a lead in that bit, and then you can basically just go, it's fine, like I can trust your decision making on that, or I can run the math over it and I can say, I've got a concern about this bit because of this reason. What do you think? And then either the person will go back saying, I thought about that concern. I don't think it's a problem because of why, or no, I hadn't thought about that. And then it becomes a dialogue on fixing that. But I don't know how I don't think we ever hit a point where both of us violently disagreed with each other about the next steps. So maybe the solution to the problem is that you should just be me and John, and then you would have no problems when it comes to mega game design. But I don't think that's a feasible outcome for most
It's
people.
hard for other people watching this panel to action, certainly.
Yeah, but I think the idea of saying like we both kind of like agreed with what the main theme was, and that kind of grew organically from there. And then saying, this section of the game is your baby, like this is the bit that you're looking after, like we'll trust that your things there. And then the conversations become like, how does that bit of the game feed into the rest of its stuff? Like that's where like the interesting negotiations happen. But because of like just how me and John work, like we could design like that and it worked. That doesn't necessarily work for all games because your things should always interact with each other, but just like the idea that because me and John are both programmers, just saying like, here is a black box that I can just be in charge of, and what happens in this black box is my responsibility. I think we could work like that.
So here's a question. Do you find then that designing in a team pushed the game to be a little more sort of decentralized as a game? Like Zane's talked about it as well, and Paddy, you talked about it, like the idea of effectively you take your bit of the game and go off and sort of focus on that. Did you find that when you came to put it back together, it felt a bit more like a Frankenstein's monster, I guess? Or how were you able to get around that?
I think when we started like the sketch of what Phase was going to look like, and again like this kind of like just the limitations of the initial design of Phase of here's 48 hours to make some monster. Like we said, oh, here's the different bits of the game, and here's how they're all going to interact with each other. So we defined how the games was going to interact with each other, and then how that game actually worked was left to whoever. So I took on like 2 or 3 bits of it, and it was just a case of, well, I know that the output of this game is going to be going to here, and here are where all the inputs are going to be. I just have to make sure that those exist, and I will fill in the details later, which is kind of like how a lot of, I think that's how I design games anyway. Like I've always gone, here's my rough sketch of like the map of how things are going to interact. I will just make sure that there is an option for something to come in and an option for something to come out, and how that actually works is a problem for future me.
Yeah, no, I like it. So by having a coherent, agreed top level design, you you make it a lot easier for people to walk away with the sub game without making it disconnected.
Mhm.
Zane, you're nodding your head, which is
Oh, I
promising.
was just thinking a slightly different approach, whereas it sounds like we went off and worked on our own on them, but that's not true. Although there was a lead, like, you know, Matt was alien lead. I actually sat down and did most of the core mechanics with him for that. So I knew how that would interact, and me and Tom worked together on the core mechanics for the map. So kind of knew how that all interacted, and then the same with the corp. So although there were different leads who had a vision for how they felt it to be, there was connection across all of it. They weren't being done, again, isolated. We were working together on them. So
Yeah, okay, no, that's good. So if a lot of iteration, a lot of feeding back, a lot of touching base, and then people knew how to make different bits matter.
yes, yeah.
Tim, from what you've said, your design process has been a lot less take a thing and go away, and a lot more just sit down and chug through things together. Is that fair? Have you
Yeah, I would say that's pretty fair. It's much more command and control in that, you know, whoever's the lead will be working on it, and then they will ask someone to go away and do a thing, and whether that's you know, please write these 20 personal briefings, or whether it's I'm struggling for a mechanic on X, can you see what you can come up with? But again, you know, the nature of it being, you know, a much smaller team that quite literally lives together means that, you know, we can sort of, it's not really difficult to schedule check-ins to talk about it. So it's a very short loop on that one, as it were.
Yeah. I mean, on which note, I do have a bit of a question about conflict resolution and time management. By nature, any sort of volunteer organization is hard to impose discipline on. It's much better when people are being paid a salary and they just have to turn up. How do you, what approaches do you take to managing that sort of personal bandwidth, personal energy for that sort of creative exercise? What happens when one person is on task and someone else just isn't in the headspace to do any work? Go on, Zane. You look like you've got
all right. Well, I think probably because we've worked in the larger group, I think there's probably a bit of a difference working in a pair than working in a larger team. And in a larger team, there definitely are peaks and troughs of all of us. We all have things on in life, and I think as a team, understand that. I don't think we've ever sort of formally agreed anything massively, but, you know, all of us have had dips, both in productivity and in inspiration or other things in our lives. And I think there's just a supportive nature, because it is voluntary. It's a supportive nature behind that we do it. But we're quite formal in terms of, we have scheduled meetings weekly. We have a project plan. You know, I come from a project management background. There's a reasonably detailed plan set out at the beginning of when we're trying to meet different deadlines and things like that. So even if they slip, we've got those that we all have agreed sort of that we're working towards. And at any time, if anyone doesn't want to be working on it, you know, they don't have to be. Like, there's no pressure to stay. Like, if it's too much of a ask, because it is a lot of hours to go into it, that, you know, no one's being forced to do it. So I think it's the flip side. You're not being forced, but it's a supportive group, I think.
That sounds very healthy.
I would say that that's one of the while you know, marrying your design partner and living with them does impose a certain amount of difficulty on breaking the project up, which is helpful in making sure it gets delivered. It probably does cause some extra tensions that other groups aren't getting, because it's on top of us all the time. And, you know, a lot, because the game and the rest of our lives is so intertwined, a big part of it is usually that, particularly as we come into the sort of approach to the game and it starts to hit crunch time, whoever's not designer tends to just do a lot more of the boring stuff around the house, you know, just releasing time for the designer to actually get on with it. but yeah, it is omnipresent, and that can be a bit of a strain, really.
I mean, I guess at least you've got the other half has consciously freed up that time to be supportive.
Yeah.
As opposed to other couples where the other person might have their own life outside Megagames or something equally weird.
Yeah, perverse notion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We shouldn't do such a thing. It's awful.
And Paddy, how did you find approaches to sort of managing time, managing lulls in availability and productivity?
So yeah, I think there was some level of project plan that we did, and we've got like a more exact one for the rerun that's happening this year. But like the advantage of a rerun is that you don't have as much work to do, apart from the things that as everyone comes at you run a game and you go, well, that bit's completely broken and you have to try and fix it. But like you're not redesigning the whole game, so it's probably fine. But like we and John have got basically a Discord chat where we essentially, mostly me, I will just like throw like spiel of complete nonsense into it, which is basically me saying, here are some ideas that I've got, and then John quite rightly ignores it for a week and then replies to it once he's worked out. After I've then like gone, oh, now I understand what I'm doing. So I think that's just the way that I work, because I can basically say, here's my check-in of where I've done stuff, because I find it easier to do it like that. And then we've got a meeting every week or two, basically to go through saying, here's how we're organising this thing. Let's chat, see where we're up to, make sure that the things that we said we were going to progress, we've progressed. If we haven't, like, why haven't they? And then it's the more fun stuff, like saying, well, okay, well, the reason why it hasn't progressed is because I've got this problem here. We just need to chat about it so that we can work out how we're going to fix this problem, because I've now battered my head against it for 2 weeks. So I just need someone else to look at it and see what the obvious solution is, because I'm just too deep in the forest for it.
Yeah, entirely fair. We have a question in the chat, or I guess it's a question I'm having trouble articulating, but Dave's asked about the distinction between design versus the running and organizing the game. I think there's quite a pattern of merging those two, that sort of designing a game is running and organizing the first run, but obviously they are very different skill sets. Have you found ways to helpfully break those down and keep them apart? Would you ever consider having one person just design and the other person just run and organize?
It would definitely be easier, but I don't think so for FaZe, because the first round was under the Pennine banner. It basically a case of, well, it's in my region, so therefore I will do the bulk of that work. But on the plus side, it was a fairly, for want of a better word, simple thing to do it, because of the style of game that we were running and the amount of advertising we did. It was a really easy game for us to organize, because we had a lot of people who said they were interested, and then when we came to getting them to pay for it, they actually all did, and then they all showed up. So like the design, like the organizing bit of it was like fairly easy. Like the running bit, I can see that's a bit different, but like I think me and John have ran enough games now. I mean, I don't know how many John's run, and most of my running experience has been in the online thing, but I think both of us know how to build a team of control and make sure that all our control are on the same page for here is what this game is and how we want you to run it. So FaZe is an incredibly whimsical game. So if someone wants to do something serious, the answer is almost no. But if they say, "Oh, I want to just go around and turn all the flowers invisible," he's like, "Yeah, go ahead. Like we can like run with that sort of style." And that's what I mean, it'll help thing. But like having this singular vision for like this is how this game should run. Because we knew what the game was, we spent a long time with it, and we kind of agreed that at the beginning. It was quite a good thing. And I guess for some teams where you don't have that experience of running a game, they might become complicated. But I don't think it's necessarily difficult. A lot of how a game runs is inbuilt into how the game is designed. the designer kind of has to do a lot of that work, I would assume.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, my instinctive reaction on a lot of levels is, well, arranging it and running it is the easy bit, designing it is where all the effort is.
Yeah.
Whatever. But I guess, like, perhaps that speaks more to sort of me having more project management, admin skills, and actually for some people the idea of having to put on and run a game is horrific, and they'd far rather be left alone to just design it and someone else then pick it up from there.
Yeah, I think, you know, from my start with sort of diversionary games where I had support with designing, but actually most of the organizing and putting on was really on my shoulders, from venue booking to dealing with people, etc. I found it incredibly stressful. I can do it, but actually the amount of time it takes away from an energy from what you want to be putting into the design is huge. So that double stress, and with very large, huge games, Chris takes on the burden of a lot of that sort of admin side of it and venue stuff. We support and help, but not having that pressure to actually put the game on is it's just a blessing. I mean, I haven't run anything in Southampton in many years because the stress of actually putting it on is too much. I'll happily give my designs to other people to run, and I'll run other people's designs, but the idea of doing both here without a lot more support is something I won't do. And I think they need separating, and they should be more separated. And that burden and that expectation for a designer to also do all of the running can be massive. It's really stressful, I think. And it's again, it's different skills, you know.
Yeah, and different groups do very different things with it. I mean, back when I was running with Pennine, while technically the designer did have to do all the admin in terms of signing up players and whatnot, and it was always very hands-off model, we had, because we were running with an established group, an established pool of control. So there was never really any concern that we would fill out the control team and have a bunch of control that knew what they were doing. And there wasn't too much concern, provided we advertised it, that we would find suitable players as well, because, you know, we had an established player base, most of whom would probably come along as soon as we put the game up, really. So yeah, I think if you were running it without the benefit of an established group, then that is going to be much more of a burden. And I think that's just being able to hand off some of that to other people is very useful, because there's a lot of work that goes into the design, obviously, and if you're having to do the admin on top of it, I mean, generally I love, as a rule, answering questions about the game. And for sure, one of the things that I did, which I think is slightly unusual, was a lot of designer engagement beforehand, in that I was drip feeding background material for months in advance and sort of fielding questions from the audience and whatnot, which I usually loved and actually really helped me nail down the game world. There's loads of stuff that only came around because people asked about X, Y, Z. I was like, yes, new material. But yeah, I did get sick of it by the end, which is bad, because it's all good engagement, you know, and it's people engaging with the fun stuff when you're also trying to do half a dozen other things that, you know, the more mundane stuff that needs doing. Yeah, not ideal.
Yeah, outsource it as much as possible. Separate it. I think there shouldn't be an expectation. I think we should support designers more in helping them put it on. And I know some groups are better than others, but yeah, definitely.
Yeah, entirely fair. So we've got through certainly all of the topics that we planned to talk about. So I would encourage anyone in the chat, if they would like, to type up some questions. Chris has come up with a very helpful suggestion of getting ChatGPT to write the briefs for you.
I wouldn't have anything for Chris to do if he did that.
Excellent. Yeah, it is interesting hearing this, just because of the range of different sort of bits that people look at with horror of the mega game design process versus bits that other people go, oh well, no, don't take that away from me, I really want to do it, that's where all the fun lies.
Yeah.
Very interesting question from Becky, and I think one worth exploring. She asks, would you ever consider advertising for a particular skill to join a design team? It sounds like, I think it's fair to say, all of the teams you've discussed working in have sort of arisen quite organically out of pre-existing relationships. If you were trying to sort of consciously structure a team, how might you go about it?
I think I've probably thought about this quite a lot because, as I said, I look after quite a lot of teams in my current job. I think I've got 13 different sub teams that I sort of have to look after. And I think a lot about team structures and what works and how they work together. So yes, I'd love to actually, start fresh and say, actually, what we need is some of these kind of skill sets. Not worrying about what the design is, not worrying about what our outputs are, but actually creating a team. And then I actually think that team then to support other designers. I mean, go for it, Tim.
Where would you hypothetically advertise for those, Zane? Because it's not something I've considered before, but my instinctive reaction is obviously there's a great wealth of people with skills in game design or in graphic design or whatever it is you might be looking for. But I'd be very leery about taking on anyone that at worst wasn't like recommended to me by someone I know personally. Because the key thing for me above all of those is that they get it. And I mean both that they get Megagames and they get the kind of game I'm trying to write.
Yeah, I think we'd be advertising still within these same groups. Like the pool is quite small. And I think we kind of have, because, for very large, huge games, we did ask for support. So Nelly over in Australia did sort of a lot of the formatting and final versions, stuff like that. Paddy, we asked you to do term timer and stuff like that. I think really we've sort of done probably direct recruitment where we've known people with skill sets and asked them for support in certain areas. So we kind of have done that. We've got an amazing graphic designer on board. Again, sort of, it's a friend of a friend, so a bit different. But it's because our pool is so small, it's not like we can go out for a general advert. I did, as a joke once on my Facebook group, put an advert for a job out because I think Facebook was doing jobs at the time, and it was more of a joke, but I did it to see. I got a few random people come back. Obviously didn't actually do anything with it. I mean, the job specifically said this is a joke, but yeah.
Not that deterred people, evidently.
No, it doesn't. But I do. There's a sort of a part of me that would love to set up a sort of a support team, I guess, to help people. Not just a mentor, not just one-on-one, but actually a bit of a team that's there to help take people's ideas and actually put them on. So, yeah. But don't let Chris know about that, because I've got lots of other work to do for him at very large, huge games. So keep it quiet.
That's fascinating. And I guess we've talked a little bit about advertising for people, or what skills you might go out and look for and how you might advertise for them. Anywhere else? I mean, obviously advertising within the mega game community, within established forums like the various Discord servers and Facebook groups, is a good way to get people with those skills. But I mean, Zane, as you've mentioned, the graphic designer for First Contact was someone who'd never played a mega game before. Is it still sort of contacts, friend of a friend type situation? Or
yeah, I think the other area to sort of go is student groups, gaming groups and stuff like that are sort of, they're mega game adjacent, but because we're not paying, there's a part of me that doesn't want to engage people in creative skills for no pay, like this whole like exposure sort of thing. It needs to be a passion project. You need to be doing this as a hobby. You're not, which makes it hard to sort of do that wider advert. Do you want to join us to spend 10 hours a week of your life working on a passion project for no pay?
Yeah, no pay, limited exposure.
Yeah, very limited exposure. Yeah,
I totally get it. It almost needs to be someone who is excited about mega games already. Otherwise, somewhat of an unfair ask.
Yeah.
Yeah. Chris asks sort of, what is your preferred team size to be a part of and team structure? Is there a maximum size you'd want to put together to design and or run a mega game?
I think for me, it's like more than 4 is getting unwieldy. I don't know whether 4 is my preferred or whether 3 is. I think that as soon as you start getting beyond that, it becomes too hard to kind of be coherent unless you've got someone who's like whose job it is to keep everyone in line, like, explicitly, and not necessarily do anything else. I think like that's, and I think you see that like in professional environments as well. Like for most of the software teams that I've been a part of have been teams of 4 maximum, because it keeps it like, it means that you can work together quite well as a team and get to know each other. And as soon as you start getting beyond that, it's difficult to really know how someone works and how someone wants to work, I think.
Okay. Zane, I'm aware that for at least Aftermath, I believe you had quite a large team working on it. So I'm curious to know how that worked out. Or was it sort of, there was a core team and
On the original run of it, it was quite a small team. So it was mostly sort of myself sort of leading it, and then 2 other sort of main supports. So 3 of us really in total. Then there was an artist doing the original art for it, but again, they weren't really part of the. So it depends. Sort of the core team, I think, as Paddy says, sort of 3, 4. I think you can stretch to 5 comfortably, but that doesn't actually mean that those members can't go off and work with other people. So there are some disciplines that don't actually need to be part of the core team all the time, and you can pull in at the right time. A bit like the sort of the briefings we're doing on the rewrite of Aftermath at the moment. You know, that's a wider writing team for that. I can't remember how many people you've pulled in now, Ed, but you know, that's a good handful of people all pulling together to do that, but they don't need to be part of the core rest of it.
Yeah.
But so actually, when you start stepping out and you look at sort of play testers and other things, because they're another important part of the team, having play testers, your control group, really your control team are part of your thing. So you actually, when you step out, it can grow into quite a large amount of people needed to make it happen. But the core team, I agree with Paddy, they're around sort of 4, is manageable as that core one, with quite focused roles and responsibilities. I would say it's really key that sitting down and having a discussion about roles and responsibilities as early on as possible is really important to having a successful team understand what each of you should be doing.
Cool. Tim, any thoughts?
So I have less experience than both the other guys when it comes to sort of designing mega games in proper teams, as it were. And I think the big thing for me would be, it's more that I would need to have that. I would need to have that control, and I don't know. I think I would struggle, Zane, with the sort of model that you've described, where you know, where it's genuinely you know, no leader on it in terms of the first contact bits there, because the games that I'm writing, I've always got a very clear story and theme that I'm wanting to explore, and I can't imagine any structure where I'd be giving that up. So I'd probably, I would basically want for the control of it to stay. I think I could work with a larger team, and I'm thinking more about Everybody Dies, the most recent run, because some of the guys in the Reading Megagames group have got very good, very particular skills, like John's graphic design stuff, some of the 3D printing that James did for us, you know, really valuable skills there. They really generously volunteer just to make it a good game. But that was very much more on a sort of consultant or specialist basis, I guess I'd say, rather than being properly in the loop of designing the game itself.
Yeah, I'd say I wouldn't recommend the approach to First Contact. That only happened because it sort of came together naturally. For all games going forward, there will be a lead for each of them, because it's just easier that way.
So we've talked a bit about, and I think there's sort of a strong view for a sort of a core team and then effectively specialists coming in to do specific bits. What for you belongs with the core team, or what is a core activity? I mean, obviously the core team might well end up doing some of those specialist roles if they happen to have the skills, but what are the things that have to sit with the core team?
I would say it's determining what the rules are going to be, and I draw a distinction there between actually necessarily writing the rules, but you have to be able to define what are the systems that we're going to mechanize and what purpose are they serving. And that's one bit where I say that's something that going from that high level concept to actually some written rules is something that I would say I'm quite good at, because in my day job, I'm an insurance underwriter, and I spend a lot of my time considering the precise wording of a particular clause. And that sort of same kind of wording analytics is quite relevant for this. But the core team has to be able to define the theme of what the game is about and the message that you're trying to convey and the scenario that you're trying to explore. They've got to be able to define what the mechanics are going to be. And my personal experience, although I don't think this is integral, is that probably means actually writing a lot of your supplementary fluff and your team briefings and probably a lot of the rules yourself. But I think actually that could be outsourced on a sort of copywriter brief type thing, provided you've got that clear vision and you can convey that vision to the team. And I think also the core team must have the project management functions itself, if it's going to be able to deliver it.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
I think you've hit all of it there, Tim. It's that ability to write the scope that you need to. You can then hand it off to other people. If you can't write that scope, you're going to need to do it yourself.
Yeah.
So interestingly, I'm not saying I disagree. In fact, I think I do agree. But what we're saying is, while the sort of narrative wording, the visuals, all sorts of stuff can go out, the mechanics is an area that the core team has to go right down to the detail on.
I think you have to be able to screen the detail, is how I would say it. So back to Everybody Dies, for instance, in the rework, Becky essentially tore the handbook up and started again to some extent. The combat system's completely different, for instance, but we had to be able to define that there would be a battle mechanic, that it needed to handle things like sieges, that it needed to handle the Iron Islanders raiding onto shore. We had to be able to answer high-level questions about how lossy should it be, for instance, roughly how many battles per game should a player expect to fight? Is this a scenario where we expect them to fight every turn? Is this a scenario where it's all about maneuver and position and there's going to be one or two decisive battles? Because those kind of high-level thematic outputs from the rules determine the rules that you need to write. And it so happened that we did largely go away and write them off that, but we had a lot of playtesting sessions with various groups around our house and others, just running through some iterations of it to check that the low-level mechanics were returning those high-level outcomes that we needed. And so we could hypothetically have turned that group loose to say, write us some mechanics for this, and then tested and validated the results. But yeah, it's less of, I don't think necessarily the core group needs to go right into the detail of the rules, but they need to be able to validate that whatever your hypothetical specialist is presenting is answering the high level goals for it.
Yeah, so give a clear brief and then have people go away and fulfill that brief. And I guess naturally mechanics are something that are much harder to brief for and therefore much more likely to sit with the core team, but wouldn't necessarily have to.
Yeah, it's I think the ability to define what those requirements are going to be, for sure. I did have some follow-up, but I've lost it. It'll come back to me.
All right. Paddy, any thoughts on that before we close on both the sort of core team, peripheral team structure and what responsibilities sit for the core team?
Yeah, I think I'd agree. Like the core team's job is that the rule book in quotes, kind of like that's their job is to come out with it. So I think definitely having they should be the ones who say this is what this game is, and this is what each of the mechanics are doing, and that's like, because then you can answer a lot of like the actual detail of it. They don't necessarily need to do that, but I think it probably helps if they're in charge of that. I seen like there's some comments have been thinking about saying like how like the graphic design and all that sort of stuff isn't part of it, and I kind of think that they like the actual detail of the graphic design definitely doesn't necessarily need to be a core team, but like what that graphic design should be doing is an important part of your design process, because you're telling the players here is what this card will do and how it should affect it, and I think that's an important part of it. It's basically a case of your core team's job is to answer the question, what is this player doing? That's not a question that anyone else can really answer. All the other stuff that they do in the periphery, like, is basically like how do they do it, not necessarily what. That's the core. The core team's job is pretty much like that for me.
Cool. Time's creeping up on us, so I'm going to call it to a close there. I feel like we could rattle on for quite a while, and a lot of this is just super valuable stuff for the community as a whole. I do think the session certainly convinced me of something I might have been leaning towards already, that actually the idea of lone wolf designers is probably much less sustainable of a model than team-based design. And so I think these sort of discussions, while they can be a bit dry in some sense, are absolutely vital to building a sustainable design community in Megagaming. So thank you all very much for your inputs. Look forward to more conversations on this topic and hearing thoughts from more people. In approximately 7 minutes time, our next panel will be starting, which is on the topic of the evolution of play-by-email games, which I'm certainly looking forward to. But for now, thank you all very much, and I'll catch you later.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Cheers.